Good morning. My name is Robert Schmid, also known as Mr. IoT. You are watching Coffee Chat with Mr. IoT, our weekly show. And today, my guest is Jaushin Lee, from the CEO and founder of Zentera. Jaushin, did I say your name right? I always wonder if I get this right.
That's right. That's close enough.
Close. Well, what would be the perfect way to say it rather than close enough?
Jaushin.
Jaushin.
Everybody.
Well, welcome
Jaushin.
to the show. Thank you for joining us. The reason you're on the show, Jaushin, is every time I go and talk about IoT, if not the first, for sure, the second question is about security. And that's the field you spend all your time in. Tell us what you do. Tell us a bit about your company, yourself. It's great to have you because it's such an important topic.
Thank you, Robert. It's my pleasure to attend your event today. My company, Zentera Systems, we are a cloud security company. We started 2012. Started to focus on the enterprise, helping enterprise to protect their application, workload, and data when they migrate the application jobs to the cloud. Public cloud, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, whatever. Now everybody talk about multi-cloud now. So it's the first time an enterprise migrate their production workloads and data outside of the corporate firewall. And our company is focusing on providing a security solution to address this big challenge. That's what we do. And turns out that when time evolves, the IoT becoming a very critical topic. By its nature, it's similar. It's very similar to the issues the enterprise migrate production workload to the cloud, I mean, in terms of security, but it's even more complex. So now we also address the IoT security, helping enterprises and also telecom service providers as well. We actually, even the cloud providers are paying great attention to the IoT services that they're trying to host. So that's what we do.
So I always, I was a CIO for a while, and the migration to the cloud is a big step for many CIOs because you kind of give up control. I always had the impression that actually cloud providers in general do, if you get a good cloud provider, they do an amazing job in securing your applications. Often they have more secure environments than I could even afford myself. So the migration to the cloud is sort of like accepted now. Is that what you see too? Where do you think people are today in their migration to the cloud? And how do you then take this and copy this over, sort of like that analogy to the move to IoT?
Yeah. So great question. Many people have this concept that, hey, when I move my workload to the cloud providers protects it. Well, it's true in some sense, but it's not true in other sense. This is called like shared responsibility. So typically, the cloud providers are protecting the facilities, like cloud data centers, IDCs, the physical networks. They put firewalls, and the cloud data center, even the telecom co-location data centers, are very secure. Don't take me wrong, but it's a shared responsibility. That means the applications, the workload, the computing environment inside the VM that falls to the enterprise side of responsibility. Okay. Many advanced attacks now compromise the application layer and coming downwards. So it's enterprise responsibility to protect the data, the applications, the workloads inside the compute environment in the cloud.
So if I say that, let me just try make sure I hear you right. What you're saying is that it's one thing to have a really secure facility. It's another thing to have a really secure network and all the compute down there. But if I write an application or use an application on top of that at Amazon, Microsoft, Google, wherever, it still doesn't help if the application doesn't do a good job, because people can then come in through the application, use a bad password. If I go and use no passwords or too simple passwords or something like this, then they can break in that way. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. For example, enterprise can put an e-commerce website in the public cloud facing internet. And the frontier presentation level can get compromised, and the attack coming from the application layer and get into the endpoint in the VM. And the VM, the compromised route could start to go from there and then attack backend going through the, for example, enterprise may have a VPN, the VPN 24/7 always on, and then go all the way back into the enterprise. Nothing like this is the service provider's responsibility. It falls on the enterprise side. The enterprise need to properly address the security requirements to meet their compliance requirements.
So how do you help then people? If I write a crappy application, not a very well tested or not a very well thought out application, or I put insecure passwords on my application, or my APIs that talk from the public website for e-commerce back into my enterprise, how do you protect that?
Sure. So first of all, our concept, we provide a enclave. Okay, enterprise traditionally use firewall to protect their applications behind their firewall. Now they start to put the application outside the firewall. Our concept is that we want to provide a software-defined perimeter, like a virtual castle. Application contain the data, doesn't matter where they go, where they reside, and how they connect to the back end of the other applications that are still stay inside enterprise, like a hybrid environment. So we want to provide a solution to contain that application. Okay, number one. Number two, you know that how hacker hacks typically when they come in through your application, you may have a lousy application that's has all those attack surfaces. They come in. Once they come in, they start to use the common resources in the OS to build their scripts, to explore the neighbors, and then use the facility, use the available networks to attack the backend. That's one of the common practice. What we do is that when you have a, say, enclave, you have that virtual environment. The next step is that you want to lock your application and making sure that all other software or even the OS commands will not be able to generate traffic in your network. It's a wireless network. It's sanitized. Enterprise put an e-commerce application to the cloud as example. They mean to run an e-commerce application. They don't mean to run hackers command. So the approach,
it's almost like you watch what traffic it is. It's okay for black cars to go on my roads, but there can't be any red cars. Or, there's certain traffic that you don't allow, and you watch for that. And this application is supposed to have that kind of traffic. If this kind of traffic comes, yeah, not so good.
Exactly. So first of all, put together a virtual castle anywhere in the cloud. The virtual castle is a hybrid back to the physical castle, number one. Number two, monitor what's going on inside. Number three, block the unallowed, unauthorized traffics. That will be, by the way, number four, automate the whole thing. Rather than integrate bits and pieces together and taking huge amount of time. So that will be a next generation cloud security approach to solve this problem. So now it comes to IoT. You asked me a question earlier, let me address that. So now IoT is even more complex than this nature because the IoT endpoint device can be all over the place. Now the traffics are all going back and forth through, say, telecom environments. The hosting areas are not necessarily in the public cloud. It can be in public cloud, but can be also in the telecom data center. So if you think about this from the angle of the telecom providers, they need to host a multi-tenancy environment to address multiple IoT traffic for smart city, for surveillance camera, for the smart cards. All kinds of traffic are considered their customer. So their challenge can be, they're twofold. Number one, they need to protect the IoT traffic itself, not to be hacked by neighbors. They need to protect against this IoT traffic so that it does not attack other customers. So what's the best approach? By the way, how to do this thing? What they have mostly, and most of the telecoms in the world today, have firewalls, IPsec VPNs, and they also have data centers. It is one of the areas where the compute, the network, and the security need to all converge together. And they host all three. Okay, now with the firewall, with the VPN, and with the traffic coming from all over the place, and there are different types of IoT traffic. They need to segregate, they need to segment the traffic to maintain the multi-tenancy, to block the machine-to-machine cross-attack. That's their challenge. So our approach, our proposal for the future in the industry is a share of responsibilities. The telecom traditional physical infrastructure, firewall, the VPNs, the data centers and all that stays intact. Traffic, we need to find a way to contain it. Once you contain the IoT traffic, it will not come out, other things cannot get in. Once you contain that traffic, the firewall is no longer become the bottleneck, because firewall is already a very, very busy place. It has all kinds of policies. It's a shared place for security check. It's a bottleneck on the highway. So when you contain the IoT traffic and then segregate them among themselves, then you can reduce the pressure to the central firewall system in the telecom backbone, and then you could avoid building IPsec VPN in a static manner. So that helps the telecom traffic engineering and multi-tenancy in a very significant way.
If you're just joining us, I'm Robert Schmid, the Chief IoT Technologist for Deloitte, and you're watching Coffee with Mr. IoT. Today, I'm talking to Jaushin Lee, the CEO and founder of Zentera Systems, a cloud and IoT security company. So, Jaushin, interesting conversation. Watch the traffic. It's a shared responsibility. Whenever I hear shared responsibility, I gotta ask you, how shared is it? And when I say this, I specifically ask, does the government have a role in this shared responsibility? And if you don't want to answer, that's fine. I'm just asking because there's a bill being drafted, and there've always been conversations. And then it's sort of, you talk about traffic, and all I can think of is traffic on the streets. And police is a shared responsibility, right? There's going to be something like this that we're going to have, or what's your thought?
Well, good question, great question. Government is definitely part of this. I just got back from Asia. I visit, without naming the country, I went there to visit government, actually. Had a meeting with some government folks. It's challenging for them, okay? Because the technology is migrating so fast. The business opportunities are all over the place. And their role becoming critical, but it's hard to do. What kind of responsibility they have? For example, one of the things that's very common now, most of the countries have the regulation that the workload, the data, has to stay inside the physical country boundary. That applies to cloud. I think very soon it's going to apply to IoT, because people all know that in the future, the money-making focus is going to be the data, as well as the AI behind it, right? So that's a money-making element. So it's important that the data stay inside the country boundary. So that's one regulations that many countries have. It's going to evolve.
You really think that's a good regulation? Well, I mean, let me ask you this way. Is it a realistic regulation?
Well, I can definitely understand why the intent, because data is money. Data is critical. And data generate intelligence, or the intelligence are all based upon data analysis. So if the data is not inside the boundary, then it's going to be owned by someone else. So I think that most of the government folks care about that. It's going to get more and more. For example, the security getting into the IoT devices. What kind of standard that the security needs to be implemented. It's wide open there, and the silicon vendors are investing heavily to design the chips inside the silicon. The telecom folks are all very busy working on the communication protocols for narrowband, broadband, all kinds of band, right? Yeah. I heard this LoRa communication protocol, all kinds of stuff, right? So I think that the government has a role there. Whatever frequency bandwidth available for whatever particular communication types. So it is a competitive edge for enterprises. I think it's becoming also a competitive edge for countries. So the government has a role in there. it's not necessary that I was always good that government go too deep into it, but I think that they have a role.
It's interesting. You mind me asking where you're originally from?
I'm originally from Taiwan.
Okay, well, I'm originally Austrian, and I always find that's one of the most interesting things living in the States. I've been here now for over 20 years, that there's some parts of me that still have, I know how I feel about certain things has to do with where I come from, and I'm wondering if you have the same thing, how your things influenced by country and international things become quite interesting that way for me. Is that the same for you?
Sure. I mean, different culture, different practices. Taiwan, for example, the government always like to be the neutral judge among companies, so people don't fight. People come to the government be the judge. But in US it's different, so it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, this has been always one of my interesting things. I've always felt that the government influences my life way less in the US than it has in Austria, and I always appreciated that. I'm sorry for the background noise. The fire department is just driving by here.
Sure, it's not your building, right?
No, it's not my building. I'm safe. Thank you, though. So I have one other personal question for you. One of the things I always find when I've worked with a lot of lawyers, we always get to this point, it's late at night, and, we got to start talking personal stuff. And the thing that occurs to me is that when I talk with lawyers, their job for me is to make me as safe as possible in my company. And so they think through everything that could potentially go wrong in a contract and how do we replicate that in a relationship, and how do we replicate that in the contract. And so then I sit there and I ask them, how does that affect your personal life? Do you always think in your personal life too, everything that could go wrong? So for you think all day long at work how people can break into cloud and networks and so forth. How does that affect your personal life? Thinking of all the security problems that could be out there, right? So many people are so scared about IoT and security. How do you feel about it personally about this?
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, I hope I'm not as famous as Google or not as famous as IBM, where the hackers are more interested in those companies rather than me. And secondly, well, I mean, we probably should all use Enclave to protect ourselves even at home. So it's secure there. But honestly, I think the technology evolved, by time. And today, the normal consumer get hacked. The consideration is different from the large enterprises, the telecom, the cloud providers. So I think we still have a little more time on the consumer side. My personal life, simple. I spend 95% of my time, it was not 99% of my time in the company, in the office. So making sure that the companies not get hacked is probably more important than my home. But I think that there's a chance that eventually the consumer environment, like the home network, right, would all start to get onto this kind of application enclave kind of concept. So you have your application contained. For example, I guess many folks know that a cell phone seems to be more secure than laptop PC, because the cell phone use container intensively for the application as an application wrapper. So one application cannot jump into another application. They are all containerized. Right? So in the whole network environment, I can see that potential direction in the future. And certainly on the public cloud, the telecom environment, we propose the enclave. We suggest that the application get contained, isolated. That will be one natural way of to solve the security challenge. The same thing applies to IoT.
That's good. It's good to hear that you don't worry at home all the time about what goes on and so forth. What IoT devices do you have at home? Do you have a Nest, or do you have like what are the things that are IoT at your house?
Well, my house, my wife controls it. 99% of the time, my wife watch the TV online and Netflix, and looks like that the video is the most sensitive thing to protect, making sure that the bad thing will not come in with the video. Personal data, very few. We have a very simple life. Probably not a good case, representing many other cases.
I've learned also you're doing something actually that people might not recognize. Not being very public in terms of what you have out there is another piece of being safe. I've heard that often, that people that speak loudly and bigly about all the stuff they have, you know, gets you into trouble too. So Jaushin, I want to close with one last question, and obviously you're welcome to ask me questions too, but for people that are thinking of going into IoT, I always tell them that IoT today is a team sport, and you want to pick the right team players with you. And one of the things you want to look out for them is that they're actually very diligent and really follow a lot of the testing around security. You don't want to pick a player that's sort of like nonchalant about it or so forth. So really, you gotta the first step around security for me always is picking the right players to play with. But I wonder, what do you recommend to people who start with IoT around security? Where should they go? What should they do? What's your recommendation? Beside obviously meeting with Zentera Systems, obviously, but other than that.
Sure. IoT security is a wide topic. There are many aspects on the endpoint devices, on the edge gateway, on the backbone environment, in the cloud hosting environment, in the back, and also the backend. There are many different aspects. You know, today many of the enterprises who consider IoT, they put their focus on the application layer. So the overall security in general tend to be overlooked. And then people thinking about catch up later. Let's turn on the application. Let's meet the business model. Let's validate the business model first. Let's worry about security later. Many enterprises do that. Many businesses do that. You know, I don't blame them. However, the security can be a blackguard, can be very difficult to solve. So my concept is, for the early stage of the enterprise adopting IoT, it's good to spend minimal effort but achieve biggest result. Okay, and then in that regard, I would still believe that find a way to isolate your IoT traffic, segment your IoT traffic end to end. If you can do that, that will give you the best benefits. Shut down the attack surfaces. You know, make sure your service meet your PCI requirements. Meaning, shut down all those, you know, unused ports or whatever. Yeah. It's a smaller effort, but getting the biggest benefit. Of course, there are other areas, for example, you know, getting the devices, making a device, you know, the drivers and all that kind of stuff cannot be hacked, but that's also very important. But that's typically taking more investments and taking more time to achieve the expected benefit.
So don't forget about security to start with. Do that with all the other business model and design and everything else. And two, shut down traffic that you don't need. Don't have it wide open, but really focus on, I need this pipe and I need this type of traffic, and then that gives you the biggest bang for the buck to start and then go after the other things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Jaushin, I really appreciate your time. This was a super interesting conversation. We talk so much about it, and it's great to actually have someone with me that actually talks about this all day and every day. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you, buddy.
You've just watched Coffee with Mr. IoT today with Jaushin Lee. And please join us again next Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, for another Coffee with Mr. IoT. And if you missed any part of today's conversation, you can watch the episode again on my YouTube channel, and you can see my past episodes. With that, goodbye, everyone. Bye, Josh, and thank you so much.
Thank you.